it does ultimately provide some information, actually. And it does ultimately have an impact because we are not just sharing things with publications. There's an old saying, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? And despite the title here of this particular piece in Nature, it it highlighted an interesting argument that's related to the scientific version of that question, which is to say, if you do research and it's never published in a peer-reviewed journal or something like that, does it have an impact? Well, that's a more nuanced question, and not necessarily as much of a joke, but what happened, as cataloged by Nature, and you all know very well, I have a lot of disdain for some of the things Nature has done, but this actually was an interesting piece that they ended up writing up about an argument between Jan LeCun and Elon Musk about modern research, and about scientific practice and what have you. And it was an interesting conversation. And, I've talked at length for those who are unfamiliar with the peer review process and publications and what have you. And this has a lot to do with that, actually, more so than the what is science comment in here. And that question will come back to in a minute, and you'll see why. The question here being, if you do research, scientific research, and it's never published, does it have an impact? Which we will get to that in a moment. I'll tell you what I think. From Nature on May 31st, 2024. What is science? Tech heavyweights brawl over the definition. AI pioneer Jan LeCun and Elon Musk went head-to-head in a debate about modern research that drew thousands of comments, and now video, as it were. If you do research and don't publish it, is it science? That's the question at the heart of an ongoing debate on X between Elon Musk and pioneering computer scientist Jan LeCun. Over the past few days, the conversation sprawled into a brawl about the definition of science, attracting thousands of commentators, including researchers of all stripes who offered their opinions. The discussion started on May 27th after Musk posted on X, formerly Twitter, "Join XAI if you believe in our mission of understanding the universe, which requires maximally rigorous pursuit of the truth without regard to popularity or political correctness." Musk founded the company XAI to build artificial intelligence AI capable of enhanced reason technologies. Its first product is called Grok. Now, if you're on Twitter, and I'm sorry, I can't ever call it X, but if you're on Twitter, you will see Grok there as a potential thing that you can get with sort of premium subscription and all that kind of jazz. I don't bother with it, so, there is that. But for the record, I've said it many times before that I think the purpose of science is the pursuit of the truth, and that the scientific method is a method to get at that. LeCun, chief scientist at tech giant Meta, who is known for his foundational work in deep learning and neural networks. By the way, neural networks are basically, artificial neural networks are basically designed to function how your brain works, learning things. That's why they're so damn complicated. Called out Musk's post saying that, quote, he claims to want a maximally rigorous pursuit of the truth, but spews crazy-ass conspiracy theories on his own social platform. That was uncalled for, LeCun, gotta say. It escalated quickly, with Musk questioning what science LeCun has done in the past 5 years. LeCun, who also holds an academic post in AI at New York University in New York City, replied, "Over 80 technical published papers since January 2020. What about you?" I don't honestly give a damn how many papers you've published. And that's, you might get a sense of some of my standing on this particular thing. I don't necessarily give a damn about the number of papers you've published, because if you're publishing lots of papers, well, there's no guarantee they are quality. Not saying anything about his papers, but the number of papers means nothing to me as much as the quality of the papers. Obviously, see some of the stuff for Rogue Journal Club and the reviews on this channel where it's been like the paper on observing whiteness in introductory physics. That was a garbage dump of a paper. It was not worth the paper it was printed on, or the digital reading time for that matter. And it was worthy of all the mockery it received. Lee Kuhn then posted saying, quote, "If you do research and don't publish, it's not science." He argued that research is only science when it is collected as a body of knowledge, tested for correctness and reproducibility, and then published. Quote, "Technological marvels don't just pop out of a vacuum. They are built on years, sometimes decades, of scientific research," he said. "Without sharing that scientific information, technological progress would slow to a crawl." Now, Lee Kuhn is not wrong in the sense that, we do that. We actually, do research, test it, counter-test it, critique each other's work extensively, and share it. That is actually very much in line with the Mertonian norms of science. The four Mertonian norms of science: communality, universalism, disinterestedness, organized skepticism. All of those particular kinds of things are the normative principles of science. Lee Kuhn is not wrong about that. Now, I will say at this point, I did not see the whole exchange on Twitter, so I don't know what everything is being said, but for that matter. But where I do have a disagreement with Lee Kuhn is the comment at the beginning, and I think that's probably, if I'm reading it a little bit, that's probably what got him into some disagreement with folks, is if you do research and don't publish, it's not science. I don't think so on that part of it. Lee Kuhn's definition of science sparked a backlash. Some people criticized him for not mentioning that science is often considered a method. It is a method. It is a method. Science itself is a method. Another tech entrepreneur, Palmer Luckey, who developed the virtual reality headset Oculus, condemned the idea that, quote, "people who don't publish their research for peer review will die bitter and forgotten." Who said that? Hold on a second. Who said that? Let me flip over here. If you never... Okay, so this is apparently from that whole spiel, as it were. Oh, dear lordy. What a whole a whole crazy thing this turned out to be. But apparently, I mean... Yeah. I have to take it on faith that that's where it said somewhere. Oh, here it is, yeah. To qualify as science, a piece of research must be correct and reproducible. To be correct and reproducible, it must be defined in sufficient detail to be published. Well, who the heck says it has to be? Oy, oy, oy. If you do research and don't publish, it's not science. Without peer review and reproducibility, your chances are your method is flawed and you fooled yourself into thinking something was great. No one will ever hear about your work. No one will ever pick it up and build on top of it. No one will build new technology and products with it. Your work will have been in vain. You die bitter and forgotten. Wow, jeez. Ay, 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 ay. So there's this, now that I've flipped over to this, I hadn't seen this before now. I hadn't actually seen this comment of Lee Kuhn's here before now. You make a presumption that a lot of us are out for this for fame and want to be really well known and all this kind of things, and that, bitter and forgotten. Man, that's actually nasty. Goodness. That's pretty bitter and nasty, actually, himself, to say that you'd be bitter and forgotten if you don't publish and make a name for yourself. Now, admittedly, I will not disagree that a bunch of the professional advancement of science is built around publications. You have to get yourself published and get your name out there for the professional advancement of it, but not necessarily for the advancement of the scientific process itself, not the scientific discoveries and knowledge itself. Wow, okay. I was wondering where that came from. I'm glad the Nature article linked it in here so I could find it. Whew. Still, others argue that scientific experiments done in companies are often kept private, and even outside the private sector, 40% of data from academic and government scientists goes unpublished, according to some estimates. Lee Kuhn misses the very essence of how science works. Saying science is only science if it's published gatekeeps the idea that science is a method of understanding that people can use in their daily lives, says Peter Coveney, a computer scientist at the University College London. LeCun later clarified his definition, posting, "Science progresses through the collision of ideas, verification, analysis, and improvements. If you don't publish your research in some way, your research will likely have no impact." Are you sure about that? Let me take this apart a little bit. There's lots and lots and lots of things that go into making a research article happen. A lot of people don't realize this when you're reading a journal pub. There's a lot of things. There's a conceptualization of it, for one thing. There's the methodology development. There's all these other kinds of things. And as with anything, there's a lot of, sometimes the original method you thought you were going to be able to use doesn't work. So you have to revise it. But that thing itself, and finding that the method you were going to use didn't work with that particular data or related to that question, is itself a great piece of knowledge to have. It may never itself get published, but problem is, publications are not the only way we share information with each other. Certainly not anymore, particularly when you're talking about mediums like YouTube now being available to people to actually, publish, and podcasts. There's a number of scientists I know who are doing podcasts now, and particularly a number of the professional science societies are also doing podcasts of their own now. There's no reason to say you can't share your research that way. And also, I have seen more than enough times what's called personal communications. It's rare, but it's definitely there, where one of the things that'll happen is you may talk to somebody about how they did their research, ask them why they did it one way and not another, and they will say to you, "Oh, such and such thing went wrong, that's why I didn't do it this way," or "I don't think it's going to do this thing or that thing, and we found that because of this, but we didn't publish it," and all this other kind of stuff, and yet you're still sharing information. That's personal communications, and that is a valid way of sharing knowledge with each other. It's private. It's not necessarily published. It's private conversation. But that doesn't mean that that research that was never published then has absolutely no impact. It actually probably has an impact in results of guiding and directing other types of research that are actually involved, which is itself an excellent thing. So, no, I don't buy the notion that everything has to be published in some way. Now, obviously, ideally, yes, publish it. Get it published somewhere, somehow. Do something with it to have it on the record so it's easy for somebody else to find it, because not often and not all the time do we even over email or talk on the phone to say to somebody, "Hey, can you tell me how you did this? Would you be willing to talk about your research with me? I'm trying to do this. Can you give me some guidance?" Sometimes we don't do that. And sometimes there's challenges to doing that, whether it be language or technology barriers, or, one scientist on the other side of the world. And so time zones are, of course, pain sometimes to deal with when, somebody might be asleep or awake or what have you, and dealing with those kinds of little logistical things. But that's not to say it's impossible that your research would have no impact. And in fact, it may have a lot of impact in that you end up using that thing you didn't publish to guide someone else. Where I noticed with LeCun's thing is he forgets that this is not, well, he got it back here a little bit, I think. It's not just about the individual being alone in a room and doing whatever research and what have you, and then putting their name to it in a publication. No, oftentimes we end up sharing with each other, and it ends up being a bit of a collective enterprise in that we do have our individual scientists approaching it in individual ways. Of course, individualism is still very much a thing, and very much for that. But the whole discipline of science and the scientific knowledge advances. Why? Because one individual scientist was testing something over here, another was testing it over here. You have the competition of ideas that pushes things toward the truth. If you don't publish something, that doesn't mean that that particular interchange doesn't happen. Say this person doesn't publish and this person does. Well, wait a second. Maybe they were talking to each other, and this big thing that they found out that they just never got published actually informed this research over here. That is actually still quite a major impact, as it were. So I don't agree with the notion that it will have no impact at all, and I don't agree even that likely have no impact is necessarily correct. He also hints in his post that there is need for more openness in AI research, in particular the source code underlying networks. Coveney and philosopher science Janet Stemweld agree with LeCun on this point, especially amid criticisms that AI algorithms such as ChatGPT, Sora, and AlphaFold 3 are being developed and launched without the publication of their code. Yes, publish the code. The big issue is that you need to expose your knowledge claims to rigorous examination, and you need to be responsive to the feedback that emerges from that, says Stemweld, who is at San Jose State University in California. She added that philosophers of science now see responsivity to feedback as a cornerstone of modern definitions of science, alongside principles such as the utility of science to make predictions and provide explanations. It's part of it. Don't forget the rest of the Newtonian norms, yeah? And the whole feedback thing is all part of organized skepticism. That's what that's there for. Coveney pointed to the development of generalist AI tools which aim to interpret data and produce advanced reasoning abilities. At the heart of it is a large language model like ChatGPT, but they implement what's called foundation models to solve problems. He says that it's questionable how scientific their methods are, even when their processes can be scrutinized by science. XI, for instance, is making its AI development open source. Musk argues that we can provide scientific explanations by using explainable AI like XAI, thereby replacing conventional ways of doing science. The problem is that a machine ingesting scientific literature, then creating statistical inferences, does not confer understanding to the machine. It's not an objective and rational way of creating scientific theories. Again, I actually very much agree with that. The problem with using AI for anything with this, when you have mountains and mountains of data, sure, you can draw a lot of conclusions about, well, if this thing happens, then this thing and that thing, doesn't confer at all the physical understanding of why. And that's actually the key part that makes scientific understanding of anything really what it is why does that happen? It also leads to quite possibly more things along the lines of correlation being used. But correlation does not imply causation of anything. So just a note on that one kind of thing. But yeah, I very much agree. No. And I don't believe AI, I very much disagree with Elon Musk on this. AI cannot provide scientific explanations for things because it cannot develop an understanding of why certain things are happening. It can only look through the training data to make predictions of things. It cannot actually understand why itself. Like I said, I've said it before and I'll say it again, AI itself is a model. It is entirely dependent upon its training data, whatever that training data is. But that training data doesn't give you any indication of physically why something happens, and it cannot do that. Hence the reason there is the concern. The definition of science will always be contentious, says Stemweddle, who has studied how scientists use Twitter and X. Pre-Musk Twitter has had a beneficial role in overall discussions about science where people showed that science could be responsive to feedback. Early discussions showed objectivity is not a property of individual scientists, but rather of the collective efforts of the knowledge-building community. In the Musk era, I'm afraid things have gotten less responsive to reason. Well, I'm sorry, if you're blaming Elon Musk for that, you're not necessarily paying attention. I don't agree with that. It's not just Musk per se. There's an awful lot of things going on either way. Amid the debates, Coveney says that it's crucial to maintain the fundamental ideas of science that stem from the Enlightenment. Okay, reject postmodernism then, and we'll talk. The essential element is if you can have an objective discussion, then you're not doing... If you can't have an objective discussion, then you're not doing science, because you're just articulating your opinions. He says, the irony, adds Coveney, this is exactly what was happening on X. Not just X. I'm sorry, not just X. Every social media platform is a shit show. I'm sorry. Every single social media platform is a shit show. Don't just blame Twitter for that, for fuck's sake. But back to the main question of the day here. If you're doing scientific research and it's never published, is it science? I think you probably figured out by now where I land on that particular issue if you've been watching this video, in that, yes, of course it's still science. It's still going to have an impact. Oh, well, yeah, if you're doing research and it's not published, will it have an impact? Yes, it will. Thank you. Took a minute for me to get back to the actual question I said at the beginning. And that is the interesting part of this, is it does have an impact. Not the impact of, being in published thing and immediately informing the scientific body in that way, but you end up sharing your failures, your odd things that you don't publish when you're at professional meetings and what have you. And that actually ends up helping forming other research somewhat anecdotally. Well, maybe you go look at this because I found it over here. We never got it published, but I found this thing over here that was really weird. And, it does ultimately provide some information, actually. And it does ultimately have an impact because we are not just sharing things with publications. We never have just shared things with publications. That's where this is kind of weird and haywire to me. But anyway, let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.